Welcome to ONNpoint. I'm Tim Murphy, and joining me today is Rory Ring, the CEO of the Sault Ste. Marie Chamber of Commerce. Hi, Rory.
How are you, Tim?
I'm well. I was just saying to Rory, we were having a sip of coffee before we started, and I said, one of the benefits of free trade, coffee from Mexico. It's fantastic. And we are actually here to talk a little bit about trade, about what's going on between our country and our neighbors to the south, and everything's up in the air right now, Rory.
It is. You know, I call it Trump, Tariffs and Toupees. And A's as an EHS.
Toupees? Rory, now, traditionally, the relationship between the Chamber of Commerce in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, and the Chamber of Commerce in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, has there always been a camaraderie between the two and a working relationship?
Absolutely, and we've really built over the last couple of years, I think, even a stronger relationship. We, are holding the International Bridge Walk. It's the 32nd year, so that's sponsored with our two chambers. Mm-hmm. So that in itself is a demonstration of the longevity of our relationship.
32 years.
32 years, yeah. And it even extends beyond just our two chambers. The Ontario Chamber of Commerce has relationships with its northern border communities. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce really has a great relationship with the U.S. Chamber. And really, as we've seen these trade challenges unfold, those chambers really have shown how resilient their relationships are and how supportive of each other we are as well.
So now that there is some tension at the sort of, I would say, the federal level, because that's where the trade is basically settled, right? I mean, those are the portfolios, but it is trickled down to the other levels of government, provincial and municipal. Municipally, has anything changed in the relationship between the two chambers with all of this sort of tension?
I think of anything, it's strengthened, strengthened our relationships with each other. We have chamber members that are part of the Sault Michigan Chamber. We have Sault Michigan Chamber members that are part of the Ontario Chamber.
Crossover.
Yeah, we do a lot of business, across that border together, even from a small business perspective, not just Algoma or Tariffs. Our relationship really is even to the small and medium-sized enterprises.
So when there is this sort of, what would you say, hard-nosed approach to trade, when you've got President Trump being quite vocal about the fact that he wants Buy America, America first. He's made some comments about our Prime Minister and the G7 summit that have been unflattering. And the knee-jerk reaction from some people is, well, to heck with it. You want to be that way, then we're not going to come. And there's a lot of people in our community who go across the river for any number of things, whether it's groceries or gas or receiving shipments, because a lot of companies won't ship to Canada. You have to ship to the U.S.
Tim, yeah. We also, even just, recreational or consumer travel, we supply a lot of nurses into the healthcare system over there, students into Lake State, and vice versa. So there's other transactions that are taking place from, employment, from academic, healthcare. So it's highly integrated, and I don't think that ever can be diminished, no matter what politicians say. Because don't forget, they are just politicians, and when their terms are done, the administration stays. So we really need to make sure we're engaging our citizens and giving the message to the administration that fair trade with Canada really is the best for both communities. And at the end of the day, we've fought with the U.S., alongside many wars, through many terrorist transgressions, and we've always stuck together and supported each other. And, we can't put that behind us. So we need to actually rally, if you like, our general public to talk to their politicians and say, hey, listen, really, we cannot treat Canada like that. They are not our enemies. They are not a risk to us from a national defense perspective. We've been in NORAD for, I think it's over 60 years, and it is a one-of-a-kind joint effort, between our two countries in terms of security. So, this rationale that under Section 232 of the Protection Act, is, Canada is at war with the U.S. It's ridiculous.
To say that we are a threat to their national security because of our trade agreement.
It's unfathomable.
Well, it just made me laugh just saying
it. Does. So, I think, the president was on TV in a conference the other day saying there's a $100 billion deficit with Canada, trade deficit. I mean, that's just not real. If anything, we are pretty well even. Maybe a plus or minus a couple billion here or there on either side, but at the end of the day, it probably all evens out after, 40, 50, 60 years. So.
All right. Listen, we're going to take a quick break, Roy. We're going to come back. I want to talk a little bit about do you have much knowledge of the dairy stuff, that 230, because that's been an issue that has been thrown
I do
around.
on the surface.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit more about these tariffs and what's going on, and steel, obviously, is a huge concern for our community. So we'll be right back after this with more On Point. Stay with us. So, Rory, I'm glad you're here because I'm not highly educated when it comes to things like trade, and I'm learning as I go in this new position I have with ONNtv. I'm doing more reading than I've ever done, and now I'm seeing things like 200 and something % tariffs that Canada has when it comes to dairy coming in from the U.S. But there's a reason for this, and you were explaining that we have different ways of maintaining in our own countries how many dairy products or the quantity of dairy products we are producing. So.
Yeah, so I'm like you. I'm no trade expert, and obviously you reach out to the experts to get commentary. So, from my understanding, the supply management system we have in Canada really is there to protect the farmer. Can it be modernized? Absolutely. We probably have not modernized that system. Can the consumer benefit from more free trade within the supply management system? Most likely it can. But we have taken the path in Canada on a couple of products to make sure that we're not overproducing, which means you're forcing down the price of that particular commodity. It means that maybe there's insurance practices that have to be engaged to make sure the farmers can have a decent living.
So, in other words, here in Canada, we have a system that sort of restricts the amount of dairy that is produced to make sure that we're not sort of flooding the market. And then we don't allow a lot of stuff to come in from outside the country because that's going to mess up our system of maintaining that amount of
Absolutely.
product.
No, when you take a look in the States, I mean, they are in a situation where
they have too much.
They have too much, so there's oversupply, so they can actually be dumping product, into the ground to get rid of it, or if you can't export it, then to other countries because of certain health regulations, those type of things. So, but the U.S. does subsidize their farmers. They have a very rigorous program of incentivizing investment into dairy or soya or what have you. So it's not to say that the farmer in the U.S. is not subsidized by any kind of program, because it is.
Would you say that they are subsidized to a greater extent than Canadian farmers?
I would think that if you actually probably measured it, is again most likely the same, but you have to have the variances for differences in population. Again, they're 10 times the size, right? So
basically, President Trump is saying, you shouldn't stop us from selling our dairy products in Canada, and your system is protectionist, and we don't think it's right, and so therefore, right?
Yeah. So and it is just one area,
that's
right?
one area.
Yeah.
So, and that's what he's continuing to focus on the dairy, because that is the one area where we do have a higher tariff.
It is too, and it also tends to be his support base too, right? I mean, from a political perspective, he is speaking to
Middle America,
the
farmers,
and certainly, but they also have to realize that 10% of all the dairy products that come into Canada are duty-free. There are no tariffs applied to it, so they are allowed into the market. But obviously, they're restricted in terms of the volume that they can bring into the Canadian marketplace, because we do want to make sure that our Canadian farmers are having a decent lifestyle, if you like.
All right, so now that's what his sticking point is about the dairy. But when it comes to steel, What's his excuse there?
Well, I think, again, it comes down to, his view that it is a national defense strategy again, Under Section 232 of the Protection Act, it says aluminum, steel, semiconductors, and there's a couple other products in there that are identified. But he's just, he's used that to the extreme, so that if you actually look at that and the way the Canadian politicians and government has viewed it is that it is illegal. And technically it is illegal.
What's illegal?
The imposition of tariffs on steel and aluminum for the purposes of defending your country.
Okay.
So if you go to the World Trade Organization, and there's rules-based trade that happens through that organization, and they too would say that it is not a legitimate use of that particular clause within the Protection Act. But that system takes a lot of time. So, Canada's reaction to retaliate with tariffs, one-for-one tariffs, but also a wide variety of product so that is equivalent to the same value as the steel and aluminum tariffs is very much justifiable. So,
and it hasn't kicked in yet.
Well, July 1st, the Canadian tariffs are. The US
Americans
tariffs
are already in.
there, and we're always seeing comments from our members about some of the challenges in terms of sourcing steel, because the steel trade is actually equivalent. If not, the U.S. has a little bit of a surplus on steel trade with Canada. They have a larger share of market of the Canadian steel use, whereas Canada has a lower percentage of market in the U.S., but the volumes are the same.
All right.
So, really, there is no rationale for putting it into place. And, this argument that, steel plants will start up in the U.S. Is a fallacy, because when you take a look at the implications for jobs, there is a study done that showed about 1,500 jobs in Michigan would be created through the tariff and aluminum tariffs, but they would lose almost 16,000 jobs.
Whoa.
So, you're talking within steel use within cars, appliances, technology, and aluminum, especially in aluminum, armor plating in your defense, all of those things will be consumed less because the price is being artificially inflated. So at the end of the day, the consumer stops spending money, and that's where the job loss starts to occur.
All right. When we come back, you mentioned autos. I want to get a little bit into the auto sector and what the threat is there right now. All right. So stay with us. We'll be back with more ONNpoint and Rory Ring, the CEO of Sault Ste. Marie's Chamber of Commerce, right after this. Thanks for sticking around ONNpoint. I'm Tim Murphy. This is Rory Ring, the CEO from the Sault Ste. Marie Chamber of Commerce, and we are talking about trade now. So we've got the tariffs that Canada is going to implement starting in July on steel and aluminum. Anything else that we're...
Bourbon, maple syrup. There's a
syrup. Well, now
there's a very significant list.
We're hitting them where they live when you start with the maple syrup.
But it's a great point, because that list is very much targeted at the base of support for the Trump administration, right? So they've targeted a lot of, and the European Union has done the same.
Yes, they're actually looking at who his supporters are to try to hit them where it hurts.
Absolutely. And it's there's, even if you take a look at like the state of Texas, hundreds of thousands of jobs actually rely on trade and trade with Canada. So, the scope of this is not just Canada, but it also means job losses to the U.S. employee base, right? So the latest estimate now with them implementing the Chinese tariffs, and including now potentially auto, as well as aluminum and steel, there's now estimated roughly 2.6 million jobs that could be lost. U.S. jobs.
American jobs lost because of the tariffs?
Absolutely.
And now with auto, but maybe kicking in with auto.
And maybe kicking in with auto. When you take a look at Windsor, Ontario, they employ, the auto industry in Canada roughly employs about 120,000 people.
Okay.
Right, and if you take a look at steel is about 100,000 people when you look at all the downstream and the supply chain.
All right.
And then, so you look at, just those, those two goods.
That's 250,000 people right there.
That's a lot of jobs. That's a lot of jobs.
Yeah.
So, the threat now is that can these kind of policies put put both our countries into recession. Right, so that's some of the discussion that's going on. And
did you hear? President Trump actually was quoted as saying that he won't rest until there is not one more Mercedes-Benz driving down Fifth Avenue in New York City. So this is Germany. He's hitting everybody with this.
You know, and it's a real challenge on how do you start to change that conversation?
How do you open a dialogue?
And you and I talked about that at the front end of this. Is how do we get, you know, like our counterparts in Sault, Michigan.
Yes.
Well, we need them to phone their Congress. They need to phone the senators. You know, they really need to mobilize and make those conversations. So, you know, the Canadian Chamber has been very much in dialogue with the U.S. Chamber. And the U.S. Chamber is trying to apply pressure and is being very vocal about the potential of job losses. They estimate just within steel and auto is 1.8 million job losses in the U.S. You know, and you take a look at that, and again, just, you know, simple math, Canada's 1/10, so, you know, that could be 180,000 jobs in Canada. It has that potential. So, you know, we have to be very careful on how we approach mobilizing our U.S. counterparts, right? So again, you know, I'm not agreeing with boycotting the U.S. I think
you don't agree?
Don't agree. You know, it's not.
You don't want to disengage.
Yeah, you don't want to disengage, and I think we really need to embrace our U.S. counterparts, because they could be faced with very significant job losses like we may be. So, you know, we share in that pain together, and we just need to be able to convince the current U.S. administration and the politicians that fair and open trade, rules-based trade, is really the solution to bring economic prosperity to everybody.
We haven't even talked about tourism. I mean, that's a whole other, if Canadians en masse were to say no more Disneyland, I'm not going to Florida for my winter vacation, I'm not going to Palm Springs to golf, I'm not going to, do you know the damage? I'm not going to see a show on Broadway,
Absolutely.
I'm not going to shop in Chicago. We could really kneecap their
It could be,
economy.
you know, and it could be very dangerous. I mean, you know, and then you just end up down that reciprocative, you know, that spiral down to nowhere, right? So, you know, I think we have to be resilient. As Canadians, we're resilient, and I think, you know, our U.S. counterparts see that we're resilient, and the language that's coming out of the White House, and I think they see it as inappropriate as well. So.
Except you also mentioned to me that at this point, he still has about an 85% approval rate with the Republican Party.
It is, and that's very worrisome. You know, I mean, it is, I mean, obviously he ran his candidacy on a certain platform, and he is implementing that platform. I think he may have diverged to the extreme on that. And I think over time the realization will come that this really is not the way to go. You know, and
cooler heads will prevail.
Cooler heads will prevail, and alienating your most common friendly relationships is not going to be beneficial to America in the long run.
And neither will withdrawing from the United Nations. I don't think that's going to help either.
No, absolutely.
Boy.
You know, so.
Oh, well, okay, so we're going to take another break, Rory. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about local issues.
Absolutely.
About what's going on with Sault Ste. Marie and our economy.
Perfect.
And how we're being affected by what's going on nationally, okay?
Perfect.
With thanks to Rory Ring, we'll stay tuned with more On Point. We'll be right back after this brief message. So, Rory, now my next question is, here we are in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. How is this affecting us as a community, and what's going to be next for us?
Well, you know, I think for us as a community, you know, we have to be proactive in building that relationship with our Sault, Michigan neighbors and continue to have that positive relationship. And we can demonstrate that solidarity by attending the International Bridge Walk,
which is this
June 23rd.
Saturday.
So that's a great way to really sort of say, hey, we're in this together. You know, wear your red and white, wear your red, white, and blue.
Right.
So, you know, it will impact us here. You know, obviously, 2,700 jobs are associated directly with the steel plant. That is roughly, when you look at the supply chain, is almost another 6,000 jobs in Sault Ste. Marie that rely on Algoma steel.
It's that the number is that high.
Absolutely. You know, and you can take that sort of with Tariffs as well. Tariffs supplies a lot of pipe into the U.S. and also out west. And one of the challenges there is what we call diversion. So if the wall's up around America and that trade gets slowed down, that product can divert itself into Canada. So you can find foreign countries are going to start to take market share away from our Canadian companies in the Canadian marketplace. So we have to be very careful about how we treat fair trade coming into Canada as well. Obviously, we've not put the walls up as the U.S. president has done, but we need to make sure that we're not damaging our own Canadian companies because trade or materials are coming in from other countries that don't believe in fair trade. So, we take a look at...
Would that be China?
Yeah, I was going to say, we just take a look at China where they're, government-run companies, mainly in the steel industry, right? So, where do they get their capital from? They get their capital from the government, not from the open marketplace. And they produce to keep jobs flowing. So sometimes there's, a glut on the market and they will dump unfair pricing. And that again takes time to weed itself through the system in terms of putting penalties in place. The Canadian government has supported the CBSA with more money.
What's CBSA?
The customs agents, basically, Customs Services Border
yes,
Agency.
okay, Customs Border Security Agency.
So that they can sort of get these things dealt with at the border, but again, it takes time to implement. So we're starting to see some influx of foreign-based product coming into Canada and coming in at an unfair trade basis. So it's priced below market. There's really a whole lot of technical terms, but for us locally, it can be very damaging. Just in terms of being able to produce and supply. If it really starts to constrict us, we will start to see some job losses. And if that's not the case, you'll definitely see the cost of products going up, especially those that use steel and aluminum. So it's a very, very delicate balance.
So is it politicians, our local politicians, are we reaching out to them or they're already, they know what's going on. They must be fighting for us.
There's been a good job by Mayor Provenzano to reach out to, his counterparts. Obviously the Premier and the incoming Premier have also reached out to their counterparts. And certainly at the federal level, many of the ministries are reaching out to their counterparts as well in the United States. So there really has been kind of a full court press, right? With your chamber, your business community, your politicians at all three levels of government, really starting to sort of pressure the White House to reconsider a lot of the policies on trade.
It's like the steel plant can't catch a break. They're just getting the point where they're ready to come out of insolvency. Am I saying that right? They're coming out of insolvency. That's like on the horizon. And now we're getting, boom, this trade thing is happening.
Yeah, and it really is.
Come on, lighten up. Give us a break.
Yeah, and it's, but we need to we really need to say to ourselves, we'll make it through.
We will.
Well, we have resilience, and we have no choice, Tim. We have no choice. We gotta hunker down and do what we can to make sure we're saving jobs in Canada.
And now the local businessmen in Sault Ste. Marie, how are they feeling? How are the members of the chamber feeling right now? Are they optimistic about things for?
Well, there's, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce in their economic report for 2017 shows there's a little bit of pessimism in the marketplace in the long term, right? So, and that's all over Ontario. Now, mind you, we've had a change in government, so we'll start to see some policy changes there. Obviously, reducing cap and trade will make businesses more competitive. So that's very important when there's these trade pressures going on. If they can do something about the cost of electricity, then that will help us again be a little more competitive. So hopefully we'll see some more business-friendly public policy as opposed to what we've seen in the last few years. And we want to work with the government, any level of government, both the opposition and those that are going to be running our province, work hard to make sure that they understand what the business community needs to achieve in terms of policy that will help them be more competitive.
Well, you're a good guy to have on their side. I think if I were a member of the chamber, I'd be pretty happy to have you as the CEO, Roy, because you've got your finger on the pulse. Yeah. And it's great to know that you're in such contact with our American counterparts as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. We got to do this together. That's the only way to do it, right? It takes a village to raise a child. So
yeah, and it takes a couple of countries to make what do you call a continent work?
Absolutely.
It takes a few countries.
Absolutely.
I'm going to enjoy my Mexican coffee. Listen, well, I can. Thank you, Rory Ring, CEO from Sault Ste. Marie Chamber of Commerce. This has been very enlightening. I've learned a lot. And if you've enjoyed yourself, then tune in for some more ONNpoint next time here on ONNtv. I'm Tim Murphy. Bye for now. pleasure.